Welcome to Malifaux University. 108. Moving and Charging. Every game has specific rules for handling movement, and Malifaux is no different. In this video, we discuss the different ways in which models will move about the table, including the walk action, in which the model moves a number of inches up to its movement stat, and the following terms related to movement. Since there is no crawling in Malifaux, let's get straight into walking. When you want a model to walk, check its movement stat. Unless an ability or condition affects this number, this is how many inches the model can walk in a single action. Jacob Lynch's movement stat is 4, so he can walk up to 4 inches. For a model to walk, measure from the outside of its base in the direction you want it to go, then move the model up to its maximum movement stat, with that same point on its base, not going any farther than that. You can break up the walk action into smaller segments in order to get around terrain and other models, but you cannot break it up to take another action, such as walk 2 inches, shoot an enemy model, and then finish the walk action. You move the model up to its maximum movement stat, and then it stops. That's one action. Most models have an engagement range equal to the longest ranged melee attack on the back of their stat cards. That might be as little as 0 or as far as 2 or 3 inches. For example, Jacob Lynch's longest melee range is 1 inch, but Teddy's is 2 inches. If you move a model into an enemy model's engagement range, you cannot simply walk away. To leave an enemy's engagement range, you have to take the disengage action or use some other type of special movement like a push or place action. To avoid this, measure your movement around that model's engagement range. If Jacob moves within 2 inches of Teddy, he is now engaged by Teddy and cannot use the walk action to leave that 2-inch range. He can, however, walk around Teddy without leaving Teddy's engagement range. Normally, a model cannot move through another model or even overlap bases with other models. Some models have abilities that say they can move through terrain and other models. There's no problem when applying this to friendly models, but if a model with this ability tries to move through an enemy model, it is then subject to the engagement range and cannot leave with the walk action. For example, Kitty Dumont has the incorporeal ability and can move through other models. Her movement is 6, and she takes 1 walk action to move straight through Jacob Lynch, who is in the same crew. She wants to get around Capilius, who has a 1-inch engagement range. She can either walk around him, staying outside of that 1-inch range, or she can walk right through him, stopping within that 1-inch range behind him. She cannot, however, stop with her base overlapping his. Similarly, if Kitty Dumont wants to go through this piece of terrain that both players agreed before the game is solid rock and impassable, she could not end a movement inside it. She could walk once up to it and then take her second action to walk through it to the other side. A push is a special type of movement. When a model is pushed, it must go in a straight line and cannot break up its movement into smaller segments to get around models or terrain. If it encounters another model or terrain before it reaches the end of its push, it stops. Mancha Roja has his toss in the mud attack, which allows him to target a model up to 2 inches away and push it 2 inches in any direction. If Mancha Roja pulls this off against Capilius, he can push Capilius 2 inches in any direction at all. However, if he pushes Capilius into the crate, the rock, or into himself, then Capilius's push will end when he makes base contact. Toward and away are also special words. The player controlling the move chooses a point on the base of each model or object. Then that player moves the model so that those 2 points wind up closer or farther apart, depending on if they need to move toward or away from each other. If the movement is a push, then the movement still follows the rules for pushes and will stop if something gets in the way. If it's any other movement, then those regular rules apply, and the movement can be broken up into segments to get around other models or objects. The only catch is that if the 2 points are supposed to get closer, they're not allowed to get farther apart during the movement, and if they're supposed to get farther apart, they're not allowed to get closer during the movement. Let's look at some examples. Let's say Capilius is tired of Mancha Roja pushing him around, so he attacks the gremlin with his deadly claws. In the duel, he hits the "Ah, my eye!" trigger, which allows him to push Mancha-Roja up to 3 inches away. Because it says away, the Neverborn player picks a point on the base of each of the two models. To get maximum distance, Capilius picks a point on the far side of Mancha-Roja's base. Those 2 points now must get as far away from each other as possible, but since this is a push, it's going to go in a straight line and can't go around anything. It also says up to 3 inches, so the Neverborn player can choose to push Mancha-Roja less than that if he wishes. If there were some hazardous terrain nearby, the push could be used to put Mancha-Roja in that, as long as the 2 points selected get farther away from each other all along the way. In a different game, this Beckoner has successfully cast Lure on Mancha-Roja. This attack will cause him to move his entire movement stat toward the Beckoner. The Ten Thunders player picks a spot on the base of each model. Those 2 spots now must wind up as close as possible. If the text said push, he would go straight at her and stop when he hit the rock in the way. Because it just says move, he will walk around the rock and stop when he reaches his maximum movement of 5 inches. If there were a low wall between the Beckoner and Mancha-Roja, he could spend some of his movement climbing over the wall, but could not go around the wall, because even though he would wind up closer at the end of his movement, going around would move him farther away from the Beckoner when he's supposed to be moving toward her. This lure action could also be used to move Mancha-Roja around the Beckoner, depending on the points the Ten Thunders player chose. If he chose this spot on the front of the gremlin, and this spot on the back of the Beckoner, Mancha-Roja would move around the Beckoner until those 2 spots were as close as possible, which might open up line of sight or other possibilities for the Beckoner. Other game effects will use the term place. When a model is placed, it is picked up off the table and set down within the range specified. It does not count as having moved through or around any object or model between where it started and where it winds up. Placing can break the normal rules of movement. You measure from the front of your model's base, like normal, but you get to put the back side of the base on that point. Take a look at this Archivist model. This creepy dude has a deafening silence bonus action with a 4-inch range. We'll discuss triggers in another video, but if he gets a mask when he does this action, he can place himself anywhere within that 4 inches. He gets to measure out 4 inches and then place the back side of his base at that 4 inches or anywhere up to that distance. Pay attention to the wording of your model's place action or ability. The flight ability of this Iron Skeeter says that when it walks, it may place itself completely within the range of its movement stat. Its movement is 7, so it can ignore both the rock right in front of it and the doppelganger behind the rock, and simply place itself up to 7 inches away, as long as no part of its base goes beyond that 7 inches, because then it wouldn't be completely within that range. No matter what, always measure before you pick up the model. The final way of moving a model around is the charge action. This is a special 2-part action that lets you push your model and then take a melee attack action. A couple restrictions are that you can do this only once in an activation, and you cannot do it if you are engaged by another model. The regular rules of pushing apply in that you move in a straight line up to your movement stat, and if anything gets in your way, you have to stop. Once you finish the push part of the charge, you may take a melee action if you have a target nearby, but you don't have to. Let's see this in action. Mancha-Roja is sore about losing an eye and getting pushed into fire, so he decides he's going to charge Capilius and get his eye back. Both models have a 1-inch engagement range, and they're currently 6 inches apart. Mancha-Roja's movement stat is 5, but he has the rush ability that gives him another 2 inches when he charges. There's nothing in his way, so he pushes into base contact with Capilius. He could have stopped just shy of an inch away and still been in range for his drop-down takedown attack, but he wants to get close out of spite. The rules of charging state that if he is going to take an attack action after his push, Mancha-Roja must make a melee attack, as signified by the claw marks next to its range, so that rules out his toss in the mud action. He's fine with that, because he also has the Flurry ability that says once he finishes a melee action, he can discard a card to do it again. Mancha Roja declares he's going to do the drop-down takedown on Capilius and gets ready to flip. The Neverborn player reminds his opponent that Capilius has the Terrifying ability, which says Mancha Roja has to make a willpower duel and get an 11 or better, or his attack just fails. Mancha Roja grits his teeth and flips a 5. This is added to his willpower stat of 5 for a total of 10. He could cheat in a 6 or better from his hand to pass the duel, but he doesn't have it. His attack fails, and Capilius heals 1 due to his Feed on Fear ability. Mancha Roja knows if he discards a card to try the drop-down takedown again, he'll have to make another willpower duel. If he fails that, Capilius will heal again. So the gremlin decides to do something else. The charge, both the push and the failed attack, counts as just one action, so Mancha Roja still has one action and a bonus action to take during this activation. That's the overview of moving and charging. If you haven't already, join our Patreon for early, ad-free access to all new content, and be sure to visit the Malifaux University gift shop for the latest in Malifaux-themed shirts, hoodies, drinkware, and more. Links are in the notes below. And remember, play friendly games, keep it simple, and have fun.